Namaste Swagatam. We are very delighted to continue with this series on the Bhagavad Gita, a summary of each chapter, totaling 18, so that we may comprehend how our ancient texts are replete with traditional wisdom that is very, very relevant to current times. An essential learning to solve our problems of both the here and the hereafter. We have with us Aarti Nagarajan ji, a student of Puja Swami Dayananda Saraswati ji, who has studied the Bhagavad Gita in detail at the Arsha Vidya Gurukulam, Anekatti, Coimbatore, as a full-time student of Vedanta and Sanskritam from 2014 to 2017, under the guidance of Acharya Swami Sadatmananda Saraswati ji. She has worked in the IT industry for 12 years prior to joining the course. She has taught the entire Bhagavad Gita once and is presently teaching it online for the second time. Vanakkam Aarti ji, thank you so much for agreeing to guide us in this journey with the summaries of Bhagavad Gita. Please allow me to start with a few questions. It would seem that the third and the fifth chapter that we're about to do are very similar, yet a bit different. Arjuna continues to have the same question: should I take up arms and fight, or take up sannyasa and gain wisdom? What is the difference between the third and the fifth chapters, Artiji, and the answers by Bhagavan?
Sure. Namaste to everybody. Yes, the question that Arjuna poses in the fifth chapter seems to be very similar to what he asked in the third chapter, at the beginning of the third chapter. Let's rewind a little bit from where it all started. He came to the battlefield with a lot of enthusiasm to fight because he had so much of hatred towards the unfairness of his cousins. But then, when he saw them in the battlefield, it got converted into compassion, and then it then led to confusion about what he should do, and he didn't want to fight. And then he surrendered to Lord Krishna and asked him, "Please teach me what is Shreyas." That is, what is the means for moksha. So Bhagavan had to teach him Atma Jnanam, the reality of the self. Having taught that, Bhagavan continued to teach him Karma Yoga also because that was relevant for Arjuna. That was the second chapter. Now, third chapter, Arjuna had this question. He said, Jayasi chet karmanaste mata buddhir janardana tatkim karmani ghore mam niyojayasi keshava. Said, if you think that knowledge is superior to action, why are you goading me into doing this terrible action of killing my own relatives? Because Bhagavan had said knowledge is the means for moksha. So you say that knowledge is superior, then why are you asking me to do the inferior karma? Was his question. To that, Bhagavan had replied, Lokesmin vividha nishtha pura prokta maya nagha jnana yogena sankhyanam karma yogena yoginam. There he extolled about these two lifestyles that are available for pursuing moksha as the goal. What is that? One is the lifestyle of grihastha, being a grihastha and pursuing karma yoga, or becoming a sannyasi and pursuing jnana yoga, because each one is suited best for that. Karma yogi, to become a karma yogi, it is very suitable to be a grihastha. Karma yoga is suitable for a grihastha, and jnana yoga is suitable for a sannyasi. Therefore, Bhagavan talked about these two lifestyles, and then he talked about Karma Yoga in the third chapter elaborately. And then again in the fourth chapter, Bhagavan talked about a different kind of sannyasa called the Jnana Karma Sannyasa, where he showed that sannyasa is to be done through knowledge, not just by giving up actions. So there, Arjuna gets this idea. Okay, so what should be done is renouncing action through knowledge. And for gaining knowledge, what is the most convenient way to give up my karma and pursue knowledge? So, why should I do this karma? First, why should I do karma and then give up karma? Why not I just give up karma and then pursue this knowledge solely? So, with that, thinking in his mind, Arjuna asked this question at the beginning of the fifth chapter. That's how Bhagavad Gita continues. So there he asked, Sanyasam karmanam Krishna punaryogam cha shamsasi yacche etayorekam tanme bruhit sunishchitam. He said, you are extolling karmanam sannyasa. And then again you are extolling karma yoga, because at the end of the fourth chapter, having glorified this jnana karma sannyasa, Bhagavan finally, in the last shloka, if you remember, he said, after removing all your doubts with jnana, now get up and fight. Yogi bhava, yogam atishtha, he said. So become a karma yogi. So naturally, it led to Arjuna asking this question. He said, if you are saying I have to do sannyasa, then why are you asking me to do karma? And for that, Bhagavan had to again explain, saying, here he is saying both karma yoga and jnana yoga are prescribed for the same goal called moksha. Which one you should take depends on how you are prepared. What is your preparedness? The whole of Vedanta, some people may think it is very confusing, because Vedanta prescribes certain way of approaching the study based on the adhikari, the person, because people are different, their preparedness is different. We can't have, one fit for all. Therefore, the Veda itself herself gives these two possible lifestyles. For those who still need to get prepared, Karma Yoga is better suited. For those who are prepared to take up this pursuit of knowledge committedly, solely, for them, this Jnana Yoga with Sannyasa is prescribed. So that Bhagavan elaborately explains in this fifth chapter.
So I have a follow-up question, and I'm sorry, it might be after what you said, it might be a little repetitive. Is sannyasa essential for moksha? I think you answered it, but I'm still confused. Do we have to take up sannyasa for moksha?
Yeah. So here,
Sorry.
as we saw, Bhagavan talked about two types of sannyasa. One is sannyasa, which is called jnana karma sannyasa, which is the real sannyasa, renouncing actions through knowledge. There, it is not really about giving up action, but it is understanding that I am not the doer. Therefore, there is no doership for me even while I perform action. Therefore, I am free from kartrutva, the sense of doership, and the karma phala that accrues because of that action. So that is real freedom, that is real sannyasa. That was what was talked about in the fourth chapter. And there is another sannyasa, which is the lifestyle sannyasa, where one, having done one's duties as a grihastha or even from a brahmachari, these two options are available for sannyasa. One can either take to a grihastha lifestyle and then give up, or even from brahmacharya, if one has the preparedness, one can take up sannyasa. So it's all about whether one has that maturity, has that vairagyam, has that commitment to live this kind of a lifestyle. So this sannyasa is nothing but a lifestyle where one is freed from all the roles that one had to play earlier. Playing roles is not very easy, as you may know, as everybody knows. There are so many roles as a daughter, son, or mother, father, or sister, brother, as a grandparent, or as a friend, as a citizen. There are so many roles, there are so many responsibilities, duties for each role. And playing them out is not a simple task. So if one has to play so many roles, one will be busy with the challenges of the roles, will not have any inner leisure to pursue this knowledge. Therefore, one is given this choice. If you want to completely take up this pursuit, total sannyasa is possible. You can give up all your roles and take to this lifestyle where you are just left under the sky. If you are able to take up that sannyasa, then well and good. But is sannyasa, this lifestyle sannyasa, required for moksha? No. What is required? This jnana karma sannyasa through knowledge. That is definitely the end. But sannyasa as a lifestyle, is it necessary? Is it mandatory for moksha? No. That is what Bhagavan is saying. Karma yoga is there as a lifestyle for those who want to follow. There is sannyasa also, but there is, the people who are qualified for sannyasa are few. If one is qualified, one can take up sannyasa.
So the lifestyle of becoming a sannyasi, that we look at sannyasis in Kashaya Vastra, that is not essential. Only a few are able to do that and have that courage. But having the sannyasa, the vairagya of a sannyasi to give up the karta bhokta, the doership and the enjoyership, that is necessary for moksha. And that can be in any lifestyle. One can be a grihastha, one can be in any lifestyle. But Bhagavan extols grihastha ashrama a lot, isn't it? Why does he do that?
So here, when Arjuna asked Bhagavan, which is better for me, you please tell me. Yat shreyaha etayoho ekam tanme bruhi sunishchitam, he asked. Then Bhagavan had to say, he said, Karma Yoga is better than sannyasa. Why? Because it is the less riskier of the two. Sannyasa is a one-way ticket. If the person is prepared, then there is nothing like it. If one has that freedom from all those desires, binding desires, freedom from this dependence on the world, this ability to be with oneself, to have that inner leisure, to have that commitment that I'm seeking is moksha, there is no other goal in my life, this is what I want, then sannyasa is the best thing for the person. But sannyasa also means one does not have the support system. If one still has ragadveshas to neutralize, ragadveshas meaning likes and dislikes, which are part of anybody's personality, if they are binding, then they become an obstacle in gaining this knowledge. So nobody can be committed to this knowledge when so many other desires have to be fulfilled. So here, if the person still has desires, still has ambitions in life, then sannyasa cannot be a good option for that person. Because there is no support system, there is no infrastructure. If one needs preparedness, then having taken up sannyasa to neutralize raga dveshas by doing action is not easy, because there is no need to do any karma. You are freed from doing all karma. The only karma one is supposed to do is shravanam, mananam, nididhyasanam or guru seva. Only this much options a person has. But as a grihastha, one has the freedom to have legitimate desires, dharmic desires, to pursue them, to live a lifestyle where there is some companionship with other people. You are allowed to have those all that support system which comes along with that. But on top of that, of course, you will have the responsibility of doing your duties, because nothing comes without duties. So if you have to enjoy the pleasure of grihastha then one has to perform the duties of grihastha also. But then that is a very safe option for most of the people, because if one has not gained that preparedness to give up everything and pursue knowledge alone, then grihastha is a very, very convenient lifestyle that one can take up. Because there are dangers in being a sannyasi with desires. Then the person is not really a sannyasi, cannot fulfill the desires also. So that is not a very good option. Therefore, a grihastha having desires, being able to live a dharmic life and fulfilling those desires is much easier option. There you do your karma, do your duty, whatever the role requires. And as we saw, there are two aspects of Karma Yoga where one is able to offer all actions as Ishvara, Arpana as an offering to Ishvara, and receive all the results as Ishvara Prasada. By understanding that I am not the controller of the result of my actions. So there is no insistence on how the result should be. Although I act with an expectation of this is how I want it to be, but I am able to accept that this is not in my control. Whatever comes is coming from the Lord. I am able to accept. So that's how raga dveshas are neutralized. The insistence and the resistance for the results are neutralized, and one becomes free from those binding likes and dislikes, gains the preparedness, gains viveka, more vairagya. Then one can take to sannyasa after one has become completely qualified for sannyasa.
So, is there a choice then if one gains all the preparedness as a karma yogi, as a grihastha? So, can karma yoga just be the means for moksha or jnana yoga, or does it have to be both together? Because if one is gaining the preparedness and if one is doing everything as perfect as a karma yogi without insistence and resistance for the results, then that person has all that adhikaritvam and the eligibility. So, can they be only the karma yogi as use that as a means for moksha, or only a jnana yogi? Is that possible?
Yes, that is what Bhagavan says in the fifth chapter when he answers Arjuna. He says, both these lifestyles are meant for moksha. So, be a karma yogi in your grihastha you perform your duties, you gain preparedness and gain this knowledge. So, one has to understand. So, they talk about these various ways one can gain moksha through various paths. In that example, I think we saw last time. So to reach the temple atop a hill, one can take two different routes. One can go on a chopper, one can go walk on the road, or take a vehicle, or walk on the steps. So all these are possibilities. But how are we going to see the Lord after we reach the temple? How many ways are there to see the Lord there inside? Only one way. One has to open the eyes. Only that is the way to see the Lord, to have a view of the Lord. So, even though one may reach that temple in any other possible way, in many possible ways, to see the Lord, one has to open one's eyes. No other way it is possible. You cannot say, no, no, my eyes are tired, so let me use my nose to see the Lord. Not possible. So one has to understand that this jnanam is the means for moksha. However, you gain that preparedness for knowledge, that is, based on the lifestyle one chooses. But there is no choice in gaining jnanam for moksha. So as a karma yogi, one does karma, gains the preparedness, then along with that there is pursuit of knowledge in the form of shravanam of the shastra, inquiry into the shastra with the help of the guru, and then gains the knowledge. As a sannyasi, the person gains this knowledge just purely without having to do any duties, because the person has that preparedness to solely commit oneself to gain this knowledge. The person does only this shravanam, mananam, nididhyasanam, which is required for gaining this knowledge with clarity. The person pursues that lifestyle and gains. So there is a choice with respect to the lifestyle of being a grihastha and taking up karma yoga, or becoming a sannyasi and taking up jnana yoga. But there is no choice with respect to gaining preparedness and gaining this knowledge
Okay.
for moksha.
So, okay. So one has to have that preparedness, whether one is a grihasti or a grihastha in the ashram and or a sannyasi. But everybody to gain the knowledge has to do Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasanam via Guru Mukha. So the Shastra has to be learned via a Guru. So you follow Guru and do Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasanam, and only then one can gain moksha. Is that what you're saying? Like the preparedness is the first step that is got through being a grihastha, doing karma yoga. Or if a person has that eligibility, they can be in the sannyasa ashrama as a sannyasi in the robes, in the kashaya vastra. And but both, once they get preparedness or are ready, have to do Shravana Manana Nididhyasanam, which is the actual opening of eyes in the example you were talking about. The actual opening of the eyes is the Shravana Manana Nididhyasana. When they climb you can climb as a grihastha, you can climb as a sannyasi, but the opening of eyes is Shravana Manana Nididhyasana. Is that a right understanding?
Yes. See, for gaining preparedness, Karma Yoga is the best option available. So, if one is not prepared, then one has to do Karma Yoga. There is no other way to gain this preparedness other than doing Karma Yoga. So, for gaining preparedness, one has to have a lifestyle of Karma Yoga, either in this Janma or in the previous Janma. Somehow, the person has to be prepared. After the person has gained that preparedness, one has a choice to either continue in Grihastha Ashrama and gain this knowledge, and still after gaining the knowledge continue in grihastha ashrama, as we saw in the fourth chapter. King Janaka was, how Lord Krishna was, how Lord Rama was. So these people were grihasthas, mahagrihasthas, and still stayed in their grihastha ashrama. That is a possibility. But if one is prepared, say one has started a life as a grihastha, and one has become prepared by living a life of karma yoga, one has gained that vairagya, that I no longer require this support system, then one is free to take up sannyasa and pursue this knowledge and gain jnanam, gain this knowledge and gain moksha. So both possibilities are available.
So this chapter, one of the names, and like you said, the names were not given by Bhagavan, obviously, or Veda Vyasaji. One of the names is Karma Sannyasa Yoga for this fifth chapter. Previous chapter was called Jnana Karma Sannyasa Yoga. Seems to be a subtle difference, and we'd like to understand a little more of that.
Yeah. So in the fourth chapter, the topic was jnana karma sannyasa, and as we saw, this means that the person understands I am not the doer and therefore gives up action through knowledge. Jnanena karma sannyasa. Because of knowledge, the person understands I am not the doer. That is called sannyasa through knowledge. But here, karma sannyasa means one, the lifestyle of sannyasa where one gives up actions, the enjoined duties formally to take up this ochre robes of a sannyasi and live that kind of a lifestyle. So karma sannyasa is a lifestyle, whereas jnana karma sannyasa is the knowledge, the result of the knowledge, where one gives up action due to this understanding that I am not the doer.
Thank you, Ardiji. Coming to the contemporary society, today's society is very rights based and we see it all around us. Whereas Bhagavan is talking about duties. And he also says Guna Karma, that he has created the Guna Karma Vibhagam, he talks about. So there is duties and there is rights. So, what is the difference between such societies from a Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavan's point of view?
Yeah. So here, the Vedic society is a duty-based society, as against the contemporary society, which is rights-based. What does it mean to be a duty-based society? In the Vedic vision, and in the fourth chapter, Bhagavan talked about how he created the four varnas, the categories in the society, based on guna and karma, based on the three gunas, sattva, rajas, tamas, and based on the activities that one has to perform, which is suited for the guna. So one can be either sattva predominant, or one can be rajas predominant, or one can be tamas predominant. Based on the guna of the person is assigned a particular duty. That is how the Varna system was classified. So what does it mean? So the person understands that I am put in this position in this family because of a certain reason. Bhagavan has put me here. I will learn what the family's profession is, and I will do it to the best of my ability. So there is no comparison, there is no competition. So I am assigned already the vocation that I have to take up, and I do my best. I learn it the best way. I do whatever I can to accomplish that, to fulfill that duty. There is no motivation of remuneration or appreciation or satisfaction in this. So it is given to me, I perform it as a duty. Even now we can see that this is how people used to talk, maybe not right now, but earlier. So they would say, I have to join duty when they have to go to work, when they have to go to their job. So these words were not used. Job, work were not used. They would say, I have to join duty, I have to go to duty. And even yesterday, I saw, we had gone on in an auto rickshaw, and this person, this driver, we said, please, you can take this other route while going back. He said, no, I've already taken up duty. That means the next ride he has already taken up. But he uses the word duty. You can see how it has come down into our psyche that the work is my duty. So there is no comparison, there is no competition. What is the motivation? In the Vedic vision, moksha is the goal for everybody. Whatever job I take up, whatever job I am given, that I perform. Why? For the sake of maturity, for the sake of preparedness in gaining moksha, not for the material benefit of that particular job, particular task or duty that I've been assigned. So that was the motivation. And no job was menial. They say the in the machinery there are so many parts. Say in the engine there are so many parts. The piston goes up and down, works so hard, but there is a screw which holds it, which is stationary. So then there was an argument between the piston and the screw. The piston said, see, look, I work so hard and I'm the one who makes this engine work. Look at you, you're just sitting simply idly, not doing anything. Then the screw thought, okay, what he's saying is right. I should also do something. Then it started turning. And then you know what happens to the engine when the screw comes off, right? So there are some jobs which look, very low or menial, but they have their importance. Without people to help us, without the maid coming in, how many homes will function? We do not know. Without the sweepers coming in to clean the roads, we do not know how we can manage. So, no job is menial. So, there, whatever is given to me is done in the best possible way. The goal is gaining maturity, gaining moksha. And whatever duty I do becomes the right of the other people. So as a husband, the person has duties. The person is not a husband all the time, but has taken up the role of a husband with respect to the wife, has some duties to be performed as the husband. So when the husband performs duties, then they become the rights for the wife. When the wife performs duties, then the rights of the husband are taken care of. When the citizen performs his or her duty, then the state's rights are taken care of. When the country performs its duty for its citizens, then the citizens' rights are taken care of. So once performance of one's own duty takes care of the rights of other people involved. So there is no demand for rights required. That is how the Vedic system was built. But right now, it is based on the rights. So I have to struggle for my rights, I have to demand for my rights because this duty based approach is lost.
Very well said, Aarti ji, because there's also no word for right as such. When we say hak, it is not a Sanskrit word or Indian word. It is a borrowed word from, either it's Arabic or from outside. And I also remember this English sentence which says, they also serve those who stand and wait. So there is the screw example that you gave. It is just static, but it's also serving its purpose and a very major purpose. So it's very beautifully said. And I like what you said, that when I do my duty, somebody else's rights. If I do my duty as a daughter, my parents' rights are met. So it's very beautiful, and it is a give and take. It's a relationship based society where we are all growing and learning through our relationships and reducing our raga dveshas, developing our eligibility to get jnanam. Very, very beautiful. Bhagwan also mentions that by knowing the inner nature, our real nature, our self, we can get inner peace or everlasting peace. What is the connection between knowing ourselves and gaining that everlasting peace or shanti?
This is the crux of Vedanta. This is what Vedanta is for. What is Vedanta for? What is the goal of studying Vedanta? Is to gain this moksha, which is freedom from this dissatisfaction, freedom from insecurity, freedom from the sense of non acceptance. So that is called peace, in other words. This inner peace that one enjoys, this contentment that one can enjoy, is the result of this knowledge. Now, why is there absence of peace? Why do I feel like giving a piece of my mind to somebody, or I'm shattered into pieces when somebody says something or something doesn't work in my way? Because at I make this mistake of identifying myself with this limited body mind sense complex, thinking that this is who I am. So there is some basic misidentity. We have other misidentities, but this is the basic misidentity where I commit this big mistake of thinking I am the body. Therefore, all the limitations of the body I impose on myself. I am fat, or I am not tall enough, or I have crooked teeth, or I have a long nose, whatever. I have gray hair, yes, or I have no hair, whichever. So, all the limitations of the body are imposed on myself, and I suffer from those complexes. The body is meant to be like that. This is how the body is. And it is a dharma of the body to have this kind of limitation. Not all bodies can be the same. This is how the karma is. Based on that, the body is. So when I see that, I have that freedom. When I understand I am not the body, then all the limitations of the body are seen as the limitations of the body. They are not brought into mine. I don't say I am fat, I am bald, or anything like that. This is how the body is. So there is so much objectivity because I see that I am free from the body at that level. But there is a bigger level, freedom, which is freedom from the disturbances that happen in the mind. Because there is so much of identification with the mind. I am what my thoughts are, and the mind is subject to so much of disturbance because things don't go the way that we want. Even I don't behave the way that I want to so many times. So there is so much of criticism, self criticism, or there is so much of complaint about how the world is. So that also one gains freedom from, because one understands that it is the mind which thinks, which has these thoughts. The thoughts are occurring in the mind. I am free from the mind. I am not the mind. So it is like watching some clouds passing when I am the sky. I am the vast, limitless, unaffected sky watching the clouds pass by. The thoughts, the clouds pass by. Yeah. I'm just a witness of those thoughts. These thoughts come and go. They are not going to be there permanently. And it is the property of the mind to have such thoughts. I do not identify with the thoughts and get carried away by the thoughts. I just watch them for what they are, and I'm able to be free from those thoughts. So that at those levels, because of freedom from this misidentification, and also another aspect of this is when I understand that I am all that is here. Self knowledge means understanding who I really am. So it is not just limited to understanding that I'm a spark of consciousness which is free from this body mind senses. Not only that, what about the whole world? What about even the body mind sense complex? All right, I have said this is not me, but who am I? Am I still confined to this body mind sense complex? Am I limited to its boundaries? No. I have to understand I am that limitless existence, consciousness, which is the reality of this entire Jagat, including the body mind sense complex. Jagat means the whole universe. So it is not just limited to this body, it's not confined to the boundaries of this body, but all that is here is only me. Just as in the dream, one understands after waking up, of course, that the whole dream world, the dream bodies, the dream people, their emotions, their actions, and my own body, my own actions, my own thoughts are just but that one reality which is me. When one understands that, there is no raga, dvesha, there is no pursuit of happiness by fulfilling something, because generally there is some pursuit. Purushartha is what? To accept myself, to be happy as I am. That will happen only when I understand there is nothing more for me to seek to become happy. I am the very nature of happiness. When one understands that, then naturally there is peace.
So, is meditation the way to get there, dhyana? Because Bhagwan introduces, I think, dhyana in this chapter, chapter 5, and takes it deeper in the next chapter. So, would you say that dhyana is one way? And what does Bhagwan talk about regarding meditation in this chapter?
Yeah. Meditation is not the means to gain knowledge. In Jnana Yoga, we have these three steps, which is Shravanam, which means the inquiry into the sentences of the Shastra with the help of the Guru and understanding what it is saying. The second step is called Mananam, where one analyzes one's own understanding. If there are any questions posed by the intellect regarding how this can be, how that can be, how this is possible, then through reasoning they are all resolved. That is Mananam. Then the third step is to remove this wrong orientation that one can have. Mostly one will have, because one has so far thought of oneself as this individual limited to this body and having so many problems. So even though I understand I am limitless, this wrong orientation may still continue, that I am subject to sorrow, I am subject to death. Even though I'm free from mortality, I'm free from sorrow, this old habitual thinking can obstruct my benefiting from the knowledge that I have gained by not making me understand, or by making me lose this understanding at some moments. So nididhyasanam is prescribed, that is the last step, where the person has a choice, but the main occupation there is to be able to stay with the teaching. One brings back what one has understood in Shravanam, and one which has been freed from all doubts and vagueness through Mananam, that clear knowledge that one has gained, that one brings back again and again and stays with that vision, so that it percolates into every moment of the person's life, so that it helps the person at every moment. The person is able to stay with that knowledge all the time, never loses sight of that vision. So, for that, there are different ways to do it. One can study the Shastra still and stay with the teaching, stay with the vision, or one can teach, share the knowledge, and stay with the vision, or there is a possibility that one sits in meditation for a length of time and brings back that vision, either through remembering some vakyas from the Shastra, or remembering some words from the Shastra, or just some thought occurs in the mind, then one goes to the root of that thought as consciousness and understands that I am that consciousness, not the thought. So, anyway, one is free to do nididhyasanam. One way is through this meditation, sitting in a particular posture, in a particular spot, then having let go of all the other thoughts, one focuses only on that vision. So there are certain steps which are required for meditation, for the person to be prepared enough to sit for meditation. all that is described in the Dhyana Yoga chapter, in the sixth chapter. Here in the fifth chapter, Bhagavan just starts the initial steps that are to be taken care of before one sits for meditation. Nididhyasanam, that is explained by Bhagavan by saying that one should keep the external world external. This is a very unique, beautiful thing. Why things are external? Why should I keep them external? They are already external. No. Some things are external, but still they are internal. Like Swamiji used to say, you go to Rishikesh to be free from all this entanglements. You want to break, but then without ticket, all the family members travel in my head. So they are not just external; they are internal. Even when I go and watch the Ganga, then I'm reminded of them. So as long as they are in my head, no meditation is possible. Therefore, Bhagavan says, you please drop them where they are, keep them where they are, let them be where they are. For the duration of the meditation, just let them be what they are. Then Bhagavan talks about how one has to do this pranayama, even the breath, so that the mind also relaxes. And then Bhagavan talks about how the internal preparation should be, the attitude of the person should be free from raga, free from desires, kama, free from krodha, anger, free from bhaya also, fear. So one has the right preparation, the right mental temperament for sitting in meditation and bringing back the vision. So the initial steps are talked about at the end of the fifth chapter. Then Bhagavan elaborately explains that in the sixth chapter.
This is very clear and wonderful, very well comprehended by me with your explanation, Artiji, because there are many kinds of meditations nowadays in the market, and everybody says this is what you do for meditation. But this is literally what you're explaining. This dhyana in this chapter that Bhagwan mentions is nididhyasana. So living that vision, bringing back that vision, and staying in that vision. That is what dhyana is. So that brings me to this vision itself. And one of the verses in this chapter, I think 18th verse, talks about that vision. Could you please recite it for us and talk about how it talks about Atma in all different kinds of beings? So that vision is very clear. And dhyana would be to stay in that vision, bringing that knowledge into us while we are sitting in meditation.
Yes, yes, the 18th verse is a beautiful verse. It says, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavi Hastini Shuni Chaiva Shvapakecha Pandita Samadarshinaha, where the glory of this knowledge is extolled by Bhagavan by saying that Panditaha, the wise people, are Samadarshinaha. They have this sameness with regard to everything. Their vision is of Brahma in everything. All that is here is Brahma. Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma is being shown by an illustration where all the wise people see Brahma in everything. That everything is said in a few places, few situations. One is Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane. In a Brahmana, the wise person sees Brahma. That is very easy because the Brahmana has Sattva Guna. And this Brahmana described here is having Vidya, knowledge. The person has done one's duty as a Brahmana, studied the Shastra, and has knowledge. And not just knowledge, knowledge with humility, Vinaya, Vidya, Vinaya Sampanne. The Brahmana who has knowledge combined with humility. We say the more we understand, the more we gain knowledge, the more we know that we know less. So, real knowledge gives humility. Therefore, here Bhagavan says, this Brahmana who has knowledge endowed with humility, in that Brahmana, the Pandita, the wise person, is able to see Brahma. Then Bhagavan talks about other things, basically some animals. But they are all different. not of the same variety. The first one he takes up is Gavi. Gavi is Gau, the cow. So in the cow also, the wise people see Brahma. In the buffalo, they don't see. No, they see in everything. So just here, cow is taken up because it is sattva pradhana. Among all animals, one can see that the cow is very divine, has a very soft temperament. Of course, when it is cornered or when it is threatened, then it can attack. But generally, we see that it is a very calm, gentle animal. So, in that animal, also Brahma is seen. Not only that, Hastini. Hastini means Hasti means here Hati. So elephant. Even in the elephant, which is supposed to be Tamaf Pradhana. So slowly it moves. So you can see how the elephant, moves, does its things. No, never in a hurry. Yeah, always very slow. Yeah. So even in the elephant, one is able to see Brahma. Not only in the elephant, next Bhagavan takes up Shuni. Shuni means in a dog, which is supposed to be considered a lowly creature. That is how. That is why you can see it is used even to scold somebody. So we don't say you are a cow or you are an elephant. So we use this animal to even criticize somebody. So a dog is supposed to be a lowly creature. Even in that dog, one is able to see Brahma. And if you remember this saint in the saints of Maharashtra in the Varakari Sampradaya, Saint Namdev, I think, there is a story where his wife brings him some rotis for him to eat, but he is completely lost in the appreciation of the Lord and thinking about the Lord, that he just sitting there with the rotis in front of him, and a dog picks it up and runs away. But he runs after the dog, saying, "Stop, stop." The people think that he's actually wanting to get the rotis back. But then he says, "No, no, don't eat the roti just by itself. It is very hard. It may damage your gums. Have it with some ghee." So he was running after the dog to give it some ghee because he saw Panduranga even in that Vithala in that dog. So that is a example where one has that vision that in everything there is Bhagavan in many forms. Everything is a manifestation of Bhagavan. And not only that, here with respect to the reality, everything is Brahma, and that is my reality also. That is called Samadarshana. And finally, after the dog, Bhagavan talks about Shvapaka. Shvapaka is the person who cooks dog for his meal. There are a certain sect of people who breed dogs for their meals. So they are supposed to be Bahyaha, not considered equally in the society because of some things that they have done. They have been kept away from the normal society. They are considered to be lower in the strata of the society. Even in that person, a pandita is able to appreciate Brahma. That is Samadarshana. When one has this Samadarshana, nobody is high or low, nobody is superior or inferior. Everywhere the person is able to appreciate the reality which is Brahma. That is beautifully brought out with this verse.
It's a great lesson on oneness, which is Advaita. So very beautiful. Thank you, Arti. A technical question now. So there is a mention of Sankhya Yoga by Bhagavan. I have also heard of Sankhya Darshana, like you have Nyaya, Sankhya Yoga, Vaisheshika, Purva, Uttara Mimamsa. So there is Sankhya Darshana and there is Sankhya Yoga. So just a bit of confusion and a technical question of could you please explain each of it and what is the difference and just to understand it better.
Yeah. So the second chapter was called Sankhya Yoga, and even in the fifth chapter, Bhagavan uses the word Sankhya Yoga for referring to Jnana Yoga or Sannyasa. So what does Sankhya mean? The word means Samyak Khyayate, that which is very well unfolded in the Vedas, which is nothing but Brahma Jnanam. That is called Sankhya. In the Bhagavad Gita, Sankhya is only with reference to this Jnanam, Brahma Jnanam, or this real sannyasa, which is Jnana Karma Sannyasa, that is called Sankhya in the Bhagavad Gita. Now, apart from this Sankhya, there is also another Sankhya which you were asking about. There are 6 darshanas, astika darshanas. Darshanas means the vision, what about what the Shastra says. So there are 6 sets or sects or sets of visions that are available. The same Veda, they interpret it in a different way. They accept the Veda as the means for knowledge, means for this Atma Jnanam, for moksha, but they have come up with different visions. So that they are those 6 visions where you mentioned. One of them is Sankhya. These people are different from Vedanta. Vedanta is under Uttara Mimamsa. So we have Nyaya, Yoga, then we have Sankhya, then we have this Purva Mimamsa, Uttara Mimamsa. So all these are available. Among them, Sankhya are a different set of people. They think that there are so many Atmas, and moksha also, they understand that moksha is gaining Atma Jnanam, but there are various Atma and each Atma is limitless. So there is a certain set of ideas and concepts that they have come up with interpreting the same Veda, but they give more stress on some aspects. But Vedanta is a very different vision where there is vision of oneness between Jiva and Ishvara. Sankhyas do not talk about oneness, whereas Vedanta talks about oneness between Jiva and Ishvara, and that is the Tatparya, that is the vision which is revealed in the Vedas. So that Sankhya is different, that is the Darshana, you can call it a school of thought, but this is the vision of the Veda which is called Vedanta. So this Sankhya is different.
This is our Sankhya, yeah, Sankhya Yoga. Thank you, Arti
Yes.
So finally, I want to check with you the difference between Shraddha and blind faith, because I have heard Shraddhavan labhate jnanam. So having Shraddha in the Guru is must. Having Shraddha in the Shastras is a must. Only then can we get gain knowledge of jnanam. So how would you say it is different from when we say somebody has blind faith or somebody is just believing blindly? Is there a difference, and what is the difference?
Yes, there is very much a difference between Shraddha and blind faith. Blind faith is just an acceptance of things without any openness for inquiry, without any reasoning possible. So one just has to accept this is how it is. But Shraddha is different. Shraddha is having the trust that this source of knowledge is valid. The Shastra is a valid means of knowledge for understanding myself. And Shraddha in the Guru, that the teacher is saying what the Shastra is revealing, not one's own masala. No, the person has Shraddha in both the Shastra and the Guru who teaches the Shastra. And this Shraddha is not some blind faith, because what is the one understands what is the means by which I can understand myself, my reality. In every other pursuit of knowledge, I am the knower and there is something to be known other than me. I objectify it. I have my senses to perceive, and over and above the senses, I have various ways, means of knowledge like inference, by illustration, by other means of knowledge. I can understand something and gain knowledge about it. But how am I supposed to know my reality? Who is the knower? About the known objects, the knower can know, but about the knower's reality, how am I supposed to know? So it requires an external means of knowledge to tell me who I really am, because no other means of knowledge is available for this understanding of reality. So I understand that Shastra, the Veda, is the only means for this knowledge. So that is giving the validity to the Shastra. Just as how I surrender to my eyes if I want knowledge about the forms and colors. I don't question their validity. That is how science also works. They don't question the validity of the eyes which see the stars. They question the reality of the stars, what they are composed of. But the sight, the that the eyes bring in, they are not questioned. There is complete surrender in the means of knowledge. So that is called Shraddha, surrendering to a primary means of knowledge. But it doesn't stop there, because as we saw, this is understanding, not any belief. If I say, please believe me, 5 plus 2 is 7. Is it a matter for belief? It is a matter for understanding, for knowledge. So here there is freedom to question, to inquire, to see why if there is any discrepancy, to resolve it. There is reasoning involved. So until the intellect is satisfied, one is allowed to ask questions, to inquire further and further. And that is why you can see even in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is questioning so many times, has so many questions, and in fact asks the same questions. Why? Because this is a matter for understanding, not just blindly accepting. Unless the intellect is satisfied, if it requires some reasoning, then reasoning is used to understand that what the Shastra says is not illogical. So reasoning is also part of it. That is why Mananam is a part of this pursuit of knowledge. Otherwise, one just has to listen and accept and just move on. No. Here, Mananam is also part of the pursuit of knowledge, which means that the intellect is allowed to ask questions and also see what is being said as valid after all the inquiry. So, here, definitely, it is not a blind faith, it is very different. It is Shraddha. Unless Shraddha is there, the knowledge, the openness will not be there to receive the knowledge. Therefore, Shraddha is very important, and it is highlighted in Vedanta as the means for gaining this knowledge.
So it is both satisfying the intellect through understanding as well as, I guess, verifiable through experience. Like the great rishis, munis have done, they are actually experiencing that oneness. So whatever has been said is not just something which is a vakya only, but it is verifiable to personal experience also. Right? That is why it is not just blind belief. Would you say that?
Yeah. So, yeah. Every experience is only Brahma, so there is no special experience that one can qualify as, therefore this is valid. No, but definitely in the Shastra, one understands through these three things: Shruti, Yukti, and Anubhava, it is said. Shruti is the Shastra as the means of knowledge, one understands what is being said, gains that knowledge. Then Yukti uses reasoning to understand what is being said is not illogical. Then Anubhava also, Vidvat Anubhava, where one sees, yes, the life of the people who have gained this knowledge and see that they are able to live with this oneness. They see that vision. They are able to stay with that vision. So that becomes a reality check for us to know that this is possible, this is valid.
Thank you, Arti. We would love for you to do your what you do best. Summarize the chapter fifth for us of Bhagavad Gita. Please go ahead.
This chapter, as we saw, starts with Arjuna's questions about which is better for me, he asks Bhagavan. Karma yoga, should I take up karma or should I take up sannyasa? Then Bhagavan explains, I told you about the two lifestyles. Both of them lead to moksha. But compared to sannyasa, karma yoga is better, he said that. And then he also showed how becoming a sannyasi, who is a sannyasi? Bhagavan says, Yo na dveshti na kankshati, the one who has no longing for things nor has any aversion for things. He is the one who is able to be free from binding desires, raga dveshas, likes and dislikes. Is called a sannyasi here. And if one does not have this kind of mental preparedness, then dukkham aptum ayogataha, he says, the one who is not yukta, who is not a karma yogi, who has not done karma yoga, for that person, sannyasa will become dukkha because one will not be able to fulfill one's desires after becoming a sannyasi. So, that having said, Bhagavan then elaborates about karma yoga as well as jnana yoga, being a sannyasi. So, Karma Yoga, in explaining, there is a nice verse where Bhagavan says, Kayena manasa buddhya kevalai rindriyairapi yoginaha karma kurvanti sangam tyaktva atma shuddhaye. Atma Shuddhaye means for the purification of the mind, for the preparedness, people Kayena Manasa Buddhya through their body, mind, and intellect, Karma Kurvanti, they act, they perform their duties. How? Sangam Tyaktva, having let go of their attachment towards the result of action. So basically, Karma Yoga is elaborated. Then further, Bhagavan talks about sannyasi, who is a jnani. That person is able to perform all actions. Even while performing actions, the person knows that na kinchit karomi, I do not perform any action because of having this knowledge that I am not the doer. So all that is explained. Then further, Bhagavan talks about the um, result of that knowledge. What happens when one gains that result of the knowledge? Bhagavan shows this Samadarshana, Bhagavan talks about. And also, the person does not have any more pursuit for happiness or fulfillment through material pleasures. In that, also, there is a nice verse. Bhagavan says, this 22nd verse. ये हि संस्पर्शजा भोगाः दुःखयोनय एव ते आद्यन्तवन्तः कौन्तेय न तेषु रमते बुधः. Buddha, the wise people or the Vivekis do not revel in pleasures which are born of the contact between the senses and the sense organs. Why? Because Bhagavan says they are dukkha yonayaha, they are sources for sorrow. Why? Because any pleasure born of this kind of contact, one, we understand that they cannot give us complete satisfaction. Second is they are combined with sorrow also. In gaining that pleasure, one has to work. There is no pain without. There is no gain without pain. There is some effort involved in gaining, in achieving that pleasure, having the right mood for enjoying that pleasure, and then enjoying that pleasure. And after that, after it goes, there is dukkha. So until one enjoys the pleasure, one is very happy. But then when the pleasure stops, then definitely there is dukkha. That, and then it makes a person addicted to that pleasure, making the person a slave, running after that pleasure that requires a lot of effort. Definitely some dukkha is there. So Bhagavan says they are sources of dukkha, and therefore, and also adyantavataha. They are anitya. They are very temporary. They are not permanent. They last only for a few moments. So these wise people, they don't seek them, they don't go after them for fulfillment. That is talked about. And then further, Bhagavan glorifies the jnanam by showing how people enjoy ananda without any dependence on the world. And then at the end of the fifth chapter, Bhagavan talks about the preparation for meditation, as we saw. How one has to close one's eyes, yeah, how the one eyes have to be focused, and how the prana has to be made sama, and then how one has to free oneself from preoccupations of the mind, keep the external world external, and then free from raga dvesha, one focuses on the vision. Then the topic continues in the sixth chapter. This far is the fifth chapter.
Thank you so much, RTG. This was wonderful as always. Look forward to having you again for the chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita. And until then, Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha.